Good morning and welcome to The Art of Composition. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it. So today I want to talk about Conor Walton. I was on Conor's website this weekend analyzing some of his paintings. And what's interesting to me is that I came across some of his paintings where he's actually demonstrating how he's using the harmonic armature. And very rarely will you come across this in the art world. All classically trained artists, they use the harmonic armature. There's no doubt about it. But when it comes to teaching for myself, I like to present as much information that is validated so that I feel comfortable teaching it. Now, of course, there's always a certain amount of speculation, as I've said before. Years ago, when I was teaching dynamic symmetry, it was just far too difficult to present information that I knew was valid because there really wasn't anything out there, and there still isn't really anything out there today when it comes to dynamic symmetry. But when it comes to the harmonic armature, over the past year or two, I've managed to dig up enough information that I can teach this information successfully to artists and photographers. And I decided to add a few Conor's paintings to my user's guide because he's demonstrating what he's doing with the armature. So I'm on his website now. You can find them under the tab Essays. And I'll just point out a few of them today just to give you an idea of where I got them from and possibly how he's using the armature. Some are more simpler than others. There's one in here that's incredibly complex. I'll bring it up, but I'm not going to dissect it because I don't want to confuse those that are new to my website. All right. Even though he doesn't have a diagram of how he designed this painting called Speechless, I have this on my website in my blog. I analyzed it today. What he's doing, he's using the harmonic armature to lock his subject into place in the canvas, and this is how artists use the armature. They frame in their subject using notional space. They create divisions. They use diagonal lines, a combination of all of those, and so on. The harmonic armature is a one-grid approach that has an infinite amount of variety. So when I'm teaching this information now, it's really simplified and a lot of fun to learn because you're not bouncing around using root rectangles and all these different scenarios of overlapping them according to Geeka and all the stuff that goes along in the dynamic symmetry arena. You're using one grid. And I stress this incredibly heavily in my teachings, and I know I'm repetitive about it, but it's really important to understand because I still have people coming to me that are confused about dynamic symmetry and the harmonic armature. They think it's the same thing, and it's not. The approach is very different. The harmonic armature is made up of 14 lines, and from those 14 lines, you can create an endless amount of variety. Whereas dynamic symmetry is a different system of design using specific sized rectangles called root rectangles. There's an overlap in some of the information, but they're two separate systems of design, and the way I teach them and the way I learned about them basically follows Juliet Aristides' model in her book Classical Painting Atelier. I separate the two out, even though there is an overlap, but it's important to separate the two when it comes to learning and applying the information in art and photography. All right, so you can find this painting that I analyzed using the armature on my blog page, but let me go back and I'll show you a few that he actually has on his website. This painting here, he has a diagram. This is a harmonic armature being played out here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the painting, and let me see if I can find it here. All right, here it is. What I'll do is I'll just outline a few things. What he is doing, he's framing in his subject using the harmonic armature. And I'm going to solidify this. So if I drew out the basic armature, because this always stays the same, and I won't do the whole 14 lines, but you can see how he's using the armature and then just creating additional divisions from that. And this is how, when I'm teaching the information how to construct the armature, it's always the same. And again, this is why it's so easy to learn, because you're always drawing the same 14 lines regardless of the size of the canvas or whatever format you're photographing in. It's always the same 14 lines. And I've done this so many times that I don't even think about when I'm drawing it. And after a few times doing this, the artist doesn't either. So you can see that he's using the basic 14 lines, and then he's creating additional divisions. And I'll just draw the top half to show you that it's the 14 line armature. So I could do this on the bottom as well. But what he's doing, as I've demonstrated many, many times in some of my videos, he's breaking divisions where diagonal lines intersect, creating horizontal, vertical divisions. He has one here. He has another one here where these lines intersect. And then where these lines that I just drew, the horizontals, intersect other lines, you can drop more divisions, right? More verticals. And that's what he's doing here. I know I'm going kind of fast in this demo, but because I've done so many illustrations of this before, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But he's creating divisions based on intersecting diagonal lines, right? You have this vertical intersecting this diagonal line here. And then I can drop that horizontal line right there where it intersects, and it gives me that division on top of the book. And so on with all the other divisions where the books meet. You have all those horizontal lines. You have verticals, again, diagonals being played out here with the grapes. All of this is being derived from that armature, the one grid. All right, let me show you. Let me show you one that's a little bit simpler. And I do have this in my user's guide as well. It's called Burning. And this is the painting. And you can tell right away it's a circular composition, right? You can see this movement coming in here. But here he's showing you how he's designing it using the armature. And again, it's the same thing. It's the basic armature. Same 14 lines. But he's using the diagonal lines of the armature to place his subject, right? You have these diagonal lines being played out here in the leg here, here, and down here. You could drop a vertical here. You have this diagonal line. You could drop a horizontal line here for the arm. But also notice here how this diagonal line is being played out in the fire, and then you have the circular motion at this point. But also you have this diagonal line being played out here. But you can also drop another one coming from the same corner, intersecting this series of diagonal lines right here where my cursor is. And I can bring that to the edge, and it frames in this part right there. So you have this arc coming in, and then these diagonal lines. You have this diagonal line, again being played out in the chest and the ab area. So it's pretty obvious what's going on here. You also have this diagonal line being played out right here, right? In the hand. He's not using every line, just some of the lines. Again, you don't have to use every single line. Notice here too how this is centered at this point. And like I said, this is a simpler design than some of his other ones, and I'll show you a more complex design. And I do have this on my website as well. This gets a little bit more complicated. It's called The Lesson. And what I did on my website is I broke it down in steps to help the artist understand what's going on. So you have this right here. And if I bring the painting up, and I'll change that to solid lines. He's doing the same thing here. It's the basic armature, but he's creating divisions. Notice how he's framing in the book. The book is a critical part of the conversation of the work of art. It's the focal point. When I say conversation, I mean it's the talking point of the composition. It's a focal point. When you're looking at this painting, you could say, the first thing I notice is the book, right? Staring right at you, dead center, framed in using the armature, but also you have these diagonal lines being played out in the angles of the arm, right? You have this one coming in at this point. You have other divisions here. And then you have these divisions with these intersecting diagonal lines coming in at this point, framing in the legs. You have this diagonal line being played out in the angle of the arm, right? But you also have a horizontal line coming here for the arm, underneath the fingers and the hand. You have this side of the head being framed in with that diagonal line intersecting at this point. You have a horizontal framing in the bottom of the chin. Then you have another one framing in the other side of the head. So you can tell he's framing in using the diagonal lines. You also have a center line going directly down the center of the canvas. Again, that's why I call it a conversation piece, because it's staring right at you. It's dead center. It starts the conversation of the painting. It's the focal point. All right, I'll bring up one more. And this one is incredibly complex. I'm not going to dive heavily into this, and you can find it at the bottom of the page. What's going on here is, let me just bring it up here. All right, so you have basically, you have 3 circles going on here in this composition, right? You have one starting at the right-hand side of the frame, at the left, and then there's one right here in the center. So you have 3 circles going on, but you also have the basic armature, and then from that basic armature, he's creating other divisions. For example, let me just draw out the main diagonal lines here. I know it looks confusing when you look at it at this, you know, at the place he's at with the final design. And actually, this isn't even the final design. This is, I would say this is probably 75–80% of it. But you get the idea what's going on. But where you have these intersecting diagonal lines, you can drop additional diagonal lines. For example, you have a vertical running here. And from that vertical, he's branching off in this corner coming down to that point. And then he's creating another diagonal line here, which is basically a square. My guess he's rebating the rectangle because you have a division here too, which means you have 2 squares on both sides. So he's rebating the square. And I do have a video on rebatment, and I actually have that in my user's guide as well. I believe that's what he's doing. Let me just make sure, though. Let me draw a square and see if that's how it comes out, because I'm pretty sure that's what's going on here. This one's incredibly complex. It took me a while to absorb what he was doing here. But I have to tell you, this, even as complex as this one is, it's nothing like what you see in the dynamic symmetry arena. This looks like child's play compared to some of the stuff I've seen when it comes to dynamic symmetry. Okay, so I was correct. There's a square here, and then there's another overlapping square here, and within those squares, he's dropping diagonal lines. It's called rebatment, and you can learn about that in my user's guide. It's a technique that artists use when it comes to design. And then he has the 2 rebated squares, and then on top of that, he's got 3 circles and the harmonic armature. So there's a lot going on here. What this shows, though, is how the artist can create a simple design. For example, like in this one here, this is rather simple for the most part compared to the other ones we saw. Compared to this, it's simpler. But it gives you an idea of how you can vary your designs from simple to complex. And as you learn, you start out simple, and you can build on that knowledge. And as time goes on, and the better you get at this, you can create more complex designs, have a little bit more fun, experiment. I have a photographer now that I'm working with in Russia. He's experimenting with the armature for some composite work. It's a lot of fun. But I hope this helps. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it, as always.